This isn't a formal meeting, so we'll just get straight into it. So, welcome everyone. We've got an opportunity to hear Bruce talk about his experience in southwest Tasmania and some lessons that even the most well prepared trips can go astray. So, I've heard this before, but I didn't hesitate showing up again because I think it was such an excellent presentation. It's got apart from the beautiful images, it's also got some good lessons for us all. So I'd like to welcome Bruce. He may be known to some of you, former Secretary of Bushwalking New South Wales, and sort of, I guess I'd call him a sort of an adventurer. That might be the way I could describe him. Anyway, he can say a bit more about himself during his presentation. So over to you, Bruce.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me? We got audio.
Yes, we can hear you.
Very good. All right, so I'll just launch. It's always a bit tricky speaking to an audience that you can't see, but because the audience always gives you a dynamic feedback that is always helpful. But let's see what we can do sitting in front of the screen. Adventurer, my mother calls me a lunatic, and that's probably more appropriate, David. But we do, when I say we, my wife and I do try and get to places. Often in winter, we prefer to walk when it's wild and woolly. And part of the appeal of that is that you often have the tracks to yourself. Not that we mind walking with other people, but there's something about being in a wilderness area, especially where you're on your own, that just adds another dimension. And there's a real challenge to that, actually, that mentally you're testing yourself and your partner, and you're not relying on group think, and you're not relying on group resources. So your planning has to be um, as meticulous and as thorough as possible. But your planning also has to be, I would argue, have a certain amount of instinct in it as well. And that instinct is about, understanding your capacity to do things. Um, yeah, so there's an attraction to Southwest Tasmania in coming off the edge of winter. I wanted to talk tonight about just the experience we had um, firing a PLB and the surprise to me about what that experience looked like. We had done a lot of preparation. I'll walk through that, but getting to a point where you have to pull the PLB out of your pack was not a point I thought I'd ever get to. And there we were wrestling with, do I fire this thing or not? Now, so never start a sentence with so. There I am doing exactly that. Before getting into the adventure proper, it's worth just making a couple of points about the use of the PLB, and I don't want it to be a PLB technical presentation, but there were some aspects of this experience that were quite surprising, and I thought I'd put those up front because they can get lost at the end. And they were observations made to us by the rescue people at Tasmanian Police. And we were kind of shocked actually at discovering how PLBs are used or not used, or perhaps more to the point, the way they're abused. And uh, they made these points that I've got here on the screen that people don't understand how to use these things. Perhaps more to the point, and I get why this would happen. They turn their PLBs on and then turn them off, thinking they have to keep the battery going, perhaps. But the technology, which is being upgraded all the time, but the technology in their helicopters is all about homing in on the PLB once it's turned on. But the minute you turn it off, they lose track of where it is. Um, the other uh, gripe, if you like, from the uh, Taspol rescue team was that quite often PLBs are turned on, and then the parties move location and find themselves in a situation where the helicopter either can't find them, the team can't find them, or the helicopter is in a much more difficult rescue scenario trying to pull people out of where they are. The Perhaps the worst. I just I recall one of the policemen saying, um, "We we often go to a point where we think we're going to pick up people and discover chocolate wrappers or other evidence that they've been there, but they've disappeared. Nothing more frustrating for them." Perhaps the worst thing, though, was to discover that people use their PLBs to bring a chopper in to lift them over a mountain range or to get them through 2 days of boggy swamp or. And we were told that was more common than you would expect. Um, I would think that's an abuse of the rescue service, quite frankly. Managing fatigue by using your PLB is not managing your fatigue. Speaking of fatigue, this is coming up Ironbound Range. We had a magnificent day walking through that weather, but it was howling a gale, and coming up that track we were just off the ridge, off that spur, and out of the wind, so it was kind of nice. But that was the beginning of, if you've done that track, that was the beginning of a horrendous couple of days coming down the other side. I think there's a couple of things that, in context, I found quite revealing. Uh, and that was the decision making. I've spent my life either in the military, in business, running operations in Afghanistan, aid projects in Sudan, all of those sorts of places, trekking in Nepal or South America, or and climbing in those places, um, in Kenya, actually doing a trek. We don't have to think about it here. We think about snakes, but you trek overnight in Kenya and you're thinking about everything out there that can eat you, and you'd never see it coming. But your decision making and the clarity around it is driven by the scenario. And so, in my experience, I've been able to make fast decisions, effective decisions. There's a couple not so effective, but as a general rule, in a crisis um, where lives have been at stake, the decision making is really easy. You can see instantly what needs to be done, and making the call is really not an issue at all. And that's partly because you do role play um, that decision making. If someone falls off this ridge, you kind of going through that exercise. And when you're climbing, if you're with a really good team, you'll be rehearsing that what if, what if, what if. And there are people um, in callings that are doing that every day. What if, what if, what if. And so we had a acute mountain sickness case came on within 30 seconds on Kilimanjaro. Very easy to turn that person around, get the guides off the mountain, get that person off the mountain. That person 12 years later still suffers the after effects of that, but she is at least alive. So that decision making's quite straightforward, I think. What I found here, though, was the decision making was much more difficult. It was less clear. The scenario was less clear. I really struggled with the decision to fire the PLB. And that was exacerbated by the fact that there is an emotional element to this. I quipped first time round when we presented this at the AGM that as an 18-year-old you'd never admit that, especially a bloke. You don't want to admit emotion comes into your decision making, but certainly it was coming into my decision making here. Fear of failure, the firing the PLB, what does that really mean? Does that mean I've failed in this war? Um, in the Air Force, we spoke about one of the biggest killers of pilots is press-on-itis, um, and that's absolutely the same case with trekking or climbing. I press on, thinking that if I don't, I'm going to somehow be a failure. It'll kill you. It'll kill you. Now, what's happening? Please just move to the next slide. Right. For those of you not familiar with Southwest Tasmania, it's not the best map to sort of give a scale, but essentially it's 84 kilometres from Melaleuca Airport. Airport, listen to me. It's a gravel strip in the middle of nowhere with a windsock. It's actually where that first slide image was taken. Beautiful spot. The plane takes off, leaves you there. There's no one else around. Very historical place, quite interesting from that point of view. Tin mines. Tin was mined through there into the 70s. There's a magnificent walk down here to Cockle Creek, equally deserted. You need to work out how to get out of Cockle Creek. But you've got 84 kilometres or thereabouts. The scale's a bit deceptive on this map. By the time you get to here, if you can see my pointer, by the time you get to boat crossing, you're 50 odd kilometres into your 80 Ks, and that's where we ended up stopping. We were walking early September, and there was no one else on the track, and we'd had a couple of days of gorgeous clear weather, and then we had a magnificent after we left Cox's Bight, we had a magnificent storm roar in. That's quite disconcerting when you're pitching a tent under timber and you're hearing timber coming down all night. The best place to pitch a tent, of course, in that sort of situation is either nowhere near timber, but you're going to get blown off the face of the earth, or under other timber that's already fallen. So find a big log and try and park under that. And what we didn't anticipate was that storm, even though it didn't affect us on the track, it made for a couple of sleepless nights. But the storm blew up a southerly swell that was absolutely roaringly magnificent, but it got in the way of our walk. And we'll talk about that in a moment. This is the creek. It looks very benign there, but that's actually what stopped us. It's actually not a difficult walk. People will bang on about how difficult it is to walk around Tasmania. You got the right boots, the right food, the right gear, and nothing's difficult. And it's not an arduous, I would argue, an arduous walk, except for coming off Ironbound Range. You actually descend through. You're walking down what is essentially a creek and a series of waterfalls. So it's almost canyoning. We got to Grotto Creek in good time. We'd allowed 7 days to do this with a couple of extra days up our sleeve. But we came down off a ridge into Grotto Creek, and I was ahead of my wife and thought I'll just recce the creek, and I'd taken my boots off. And then I realized there was no way I was going to get across this creek, let alone my wife across this creek. I think that was one of the key things too. If I was with one of my brothers, perhaps, or one of my old SF mates, we probably would have given it a crack. It would have been incredibly risky, but the problem was, even though all of our planning had acknowledged the fact that you should allow for tides, there are a couple of things that I missed. One was the delta between low tide and high tide is 600 mils, nothing really. But if you then add on to that a southerly swell of 1.5 meters to 2 meters, The difference between high tide and low tide means nothing. So in our planning, we'd looked at all the tide maps and we said, okay, we'll cross here at low tide. Low tide's at 11 at night. That's a bit painful, but we'll plan our trip around that. We get to Grotto Creek, and it suddenly dawned on me that low tide, high tide meant absolutely nothing when a southerly swell was roaring in. And the trap was, and it doesn't show it on the slide, the trap was that I could step into the creek, but I couldn't see the swell coming around the rocks on my right-hand side, to the right of this image. And so in this image that you can see here, the water would come up over the top of those rocks into the vegetation and then suck out again. Well, if I was caught in there with a pack, well, you wouldn't do it with a pack on. But if you're caught in there and by the swell, you wouldn't get out. I should add that there was no capacity, zero capacity without ropes. And even if you had ropes, you would have been 3 or 4 days trying to get across the creek and up onto the ridge on the other side and back down onto the beach. Um, we explored all of those options. So I had actually taken my boots off, realized that then that this was going to be a real problem for us. Um, Theoretically mid tide, so still had 4 or 5 hours before low tide. Um, Backed up onto the track before I got sucked off it, and then the first thing we did was think we could be here for a while. Our initial thinking was we'll wait the storm out and let this southerly swell drop. If any of you know what southerly swells are like, though, I was very familiar with them growing up in the South Island, on the south coast of New Zealand. They can go for weeks. So there was a vague hope that maybe we'd sit it out. Um, and the first thing we did was ration out our food, make sure that we had a week's worth of eating um, planned out. Yeah, first step. Um, we actually, I'm not sure now in hindsight why we did this, but we sat there and watched that swell for about 2 hours, 3 hours. Um, a vague hope perhaps that it would calm down. That was just not going to happen. Um, I then said to Kavitha, well, we could be here for a while. Let's find a decent camp spot. We climbed back up onto the ridge, and I was actually thinking my little pruning saw was going to have to do some hard work. Um, because we'd walked past, it turns out we'd walked past this little spot here above the creek, and I hadn't noticed it, but it was a mossy little glade, absolutely built for us, which makes me think perhaps other people have been stuck there in similar circumstances. But it was actually a good move to make. It got us out of the wind, and it allowed us just to stop and think. You don't always have that luxury when you get caught. I wouldn't say it's an emergency, not at all, but we had enough time to think through all the options. And I always carry a notepad and a handful of pens and a plastic bag. It's mainly for just keeping logs and diaries. But I started working out, what our options were as we camped in this rather idyllic little spot, actually. And this is what I wrote out, working out some of our options. We cross tonight at midnight, and we camp on the beach on the other side, wait till the sun comes up, and then get across to Prion Crossing. Um, we check at last light what the storm conditions are like, and it was really just a variation of the first option, but you break out as much detail as you can in your thinking. Don't make any assumptions about catching all of the data in one paragraph. Better to break it out. So we had a variation on the midnight check. Let's see what it's like at last light. We camp here tonight, see what it looks like first thing in the morning. Appreciating that the storm could hang on for 3 or 4 days. Just hang here indefinitely. Again, the option there, of course, was to cross at night time. If the storm continued blowing, and it was a magnificent storm, if you love storms, this was heaven. We were quite enjoying it. uh, these circumstances notwithstanding. If we can't um, get across because the storm persists, then walk back to Deadman's Creek. Now, Deadman's Creek was, I'll show you on the map, but it's really the previous bay. I think it was about 5 kilometers. Yes, it was 5 kilometers. And fire the PLB, in part because we were sitting on this ridge in tall mountain ash, lovely timber. I had the benefit of the experience in my very early Air Force days of being a strop mannequin for 5 Squadron. So that's where the helicopters were doing their training. And I was a shift worker in those days, and they would come and ask if, I had a day off, if I'd mind coming out with the helicopters, and the trainee pilots would drop you into places and pick you up out of places. And they drop you into all sorts of places to get you wet and muddy mostly. But I knew that the choppers could get us in and out of really awkward places. I'd done it maybe, I don't know, 50 times. But it's better in a rescue situation to actually be in a place where you're not making it difficult for the chopper crew. And then, of course, the extreme option was to go back to Melaleuca where we got dropped off. But as you see, then I drew up this little table, put in the data as we sort of explored the options, and certainly with 5 and 6, we'd need to go back and find a better pickup spot. We'd have to fire the PLB. We go back to Melaleuca. We're well and truly into overdue territory, and we'd have to fire the PLB anyway. Melaleuca, even though I put it in the considerations, it wasn't really a sensible option. The climb back up Dead Horse Range would have taken 3 days. It would have been extremely hard for my wife. It would have been kind of pointless because we would have then been pushing into the overdue territory um, in any event. And that overdue variable was really kicking in as we were thinking through our options as well. We could stay here and just in another 3 days we'll be in overdue territory. We go back onto Deadman's in 2 days, we'll be in overdue territory. We go back to Melaleuca halfway up the range, we would be in overdue territory, and halfway up that range, no one would see you in the bush. You wouldn't be seen until you got out onto the top. So there could have been a whole bunch of frustrating rescue work done if we decided to go all the way back to Melaleuca. The other thing that I did was just sketch out a timeline. This is in my book. We go backwards or we go forwards. Some of the overdue variables that we're thinking about. Could we hang in there with the food? Absolutely. Actually, we had good food planning to start with, and we always plan for another week if we have to stretch it out. So we knew we had the extra food if we had to. That was fine. The other thing that was really starting to weigh on my mind after we had run into Grotto Creek and then jumped back out of it was there's actually Grotto is just the first of 3, and they're all going to have to be crossed at night time. And I have experience of trying to cross tidal water in New Zealand at night, and it's just outright dangerous. You can't tell how deep anything is. You can't see. Doesn't matter how bright your light is. You can't see water coming in on you. You can't see tides. You can't see the movement of anything. You can't see timber coming at you. And this Grotto Creek was going to be probably the tamest of the 3. So again, I'm thinking if we cross this successfully, we've still got to work out what we're doing with the next couple of crossings. This is really just working through the view of that photo is actually one of the beaches before the storm rolled in. It's just get a chance to walk there, go down there. It's fantastic.
Sorry, Bruce, could you just move your mouse? Because we're getting a little thing. Ah, beautiful. That's, oh, yeah.
That's better. Cool. Um, yeah, so we just kept working through uh, solving the problem, if you like. You work with the information you have. What do we know? What do we know that we don't know? What can we find out, and what are we not prepared for? And it's kind of self-explanatory, but again, it's just getting your thoughts ordered. It's helping you get to a point where you're confident that you've explored every reasonable option. And for me, though, at this time, I was really struggling with this idea. This wasn't an idea, it was an emotion that if I fire the PLB, I've failed. I really hated the idea. I really hated the idea of firing that PLB. I was resolved to get out of there somehow without firing that thing. So what do we know? We knew we could only cross at low tide. We can't cross Grotto Creek at even on a half tide because of the swell. Um, and we knew, of course, that the water was being pushed in there in a way that we couldn't manage it if we got caught by it. Uh, what we didn't know, of course, was what the other tidal crossings actually looked like. One of them was a very large body of water that runs out against a stone outcrop. That could be moving fast. We just had no idea. And of course, we didn't know the marine weather. I think that was probably one of the biggest lessons. We'd planned for a bushwalk. We needed to plan for a marine and a bushwalk. Walking the beaches and crossing those creeks required different planning. What could we find out? I was up and down that bridge all night, checking it. It just seemed to get worse and worse as the night went through. Um, yeah, what are we not prepared for to do? Well, we knew that we were not prepared to try and cross rough water at night time. Now this is yeah, Grotto Creek, and we walked back to 5 kilometers back to this beach here, Devon's Creek. Lovely, lovely spot. Really good camp spot. A little bit blustery. We had 3 days there. I spent 3 days getting the campsite sorted out. Most people, of course, come through there and stop overnight and move on. We had the luxury of being able to tidy it up a little bit. One of the sad things actually about the south coast is that you do see a lot of flotsam washed up on the beaches, and you just realize how much rubbish we tip into the water. So we did a bit of cleaning up around there. But we moved back here and fired the PLB. And we fired it back here because, as I said earlier, you're looking for a clear spot. But I can tell you when I fired that thing, it was a seriously emotional moment. I'd spent a number of days wrestling with this and not wanting to fire it, which was completely irrational, of course. All the note taking and the planning told me the only option you've got right here today, with that southerly storm belting in, is to fire the PLB. So we got onto the beach and we fired it. I think the next slide. Yeah. Before I get there, maybe we just reflect on some of that decision making, and and then we'll tell you what happened with the PLB. The things that were going through my head, we weren't injured. I've medevaced people out of places, um, and so I know what's required in terms of a medevac. Um, I've been involved with a rescue of a broken neck case. That's it goes back to the decision making. It's very easy to someone's got a broken neck, you know exactly what to do, and it's easy to call, and no one's going to question your use of the resources. We weren't injured, so I'm thinking, God, how are these people going to respond? Um, and I was really trying to work out how I can get out of there without calling for help. Um, And of course, you've got this irrational thing that says, well, am I wasting resources? I don't know, on page 2 or 3 of the daily tally because I've squandered chopper hours or something. That's kind of where your head can go, and it's crazy thinking. Because what if I don't make the call and I do try and uh, get out of here without firing the PLB? You end up being a statistic, and a statistic that's got an unused PLB in their pack. That would be just as crazy. Um, and of course, I was thinking, well, how will this reflect on my planning? Um, I was replaying all of our planning. We'd been planning this for a number of months. We had been intending actually to go to the Falklands, and that had COVID had killed that, so we decided we'd do this track instead. Um, and the planning was, I was questioning all the planning, so you have to be careful about that. And I think that's where the notepad was very helpful as well. It helped you just be a bit more rational as you thought through what your call was going to be. And of course, as I said before, you have this idea, or I had this idea that I'm happy to confess to it. As part of the lesson, I think it's a major lesson actually for me and hopefully for others, that if I fire this PLB, then I've failed. And of course, that's not that's not the equation at all. Not at all. Just interestingly enough, we fired the PLB. I've got a video of it blinking away. And it turns out it didn't work. We triggered it about 11 o'clock in the afternoon when we came into Dead Man's Creek to Tarua Bay. And we set up camp, and I was procrastinating. Well, I'll put the tent up. And I knew that Hobart was 20 minutes flying time away, so I thought, well, actually, we didn't put the tent up. Sorry, I put the tarp up because it was raining. We'll put the tarp up. We'll have a bite to eat, then I'll fire this. And I was procrastinating, and in the end, fired it. Waited and waited, and nothing happened. Got up the next morning, still nothing, and I thought, gosh, if we'd had a snake bite, we'd be in all sorts of trouble. So I knowing that we're, as the crow flies, very close to Hobart, I thought I'll just turn the phone on and just see if there's anything there. Maybe there's half a bar of coverage or something. Stupid idea. That does not happen in southwest Tasmania. But to my surprise, my newly upgraded iPhone had this emergency SOS function on it. It's a SMS based service, and I thought, oh, I'll try this, and I activated it. I found myself talking, or not talking, but communicating via SMS. I think to AI, but it's very convincing artificial intelligence. Clearly very American because they were talking about fire rescue services and the sorts of things you would get out of the US, not out of Australia. But later that afternoon, Taspol turned up. That was very even just reflecting on it now. That was quite an emotional moment. But when we had a great opportunity to compare notes with Taspol because we had to refuel before halfway back up to Hobart. So we had a good sort of 40 minutes with them. We also had a good debrief when we got back to Hobart, which was extremely helpful. It turns out within 7 minutes of me activating this, and there's a screenshot on the left there of the system in play. Within 7 minutes, they had been advised that we were needing help. The way Tasmanian Rescue Services work is they are not interested in you filing a plan beforehand, but what they do want is, which is interesting, what they do want is for you to have a backup person or persons, ideally two, who know your walking capacity, your adventure capacity, your gear capacity, and also know your plan. And um, some folk, two people who could address all of those things were in the background. And one of them, Hamish, I had said, look, if I don't call you inside 2 days of when we're planning on getting out, that's fine, don't sweat. But third day, you might want to uh, give someone a call. Taspol called Hamish, and because those contact details are recorded with the uh, uh, in Canberra with someone help me here. Um, anyway, with the rescue centre in Canberra.
AMSA?
Yeah,
AMS.
yeah, thanks, AMSA. Yep. So um, they called Hamish, and they were able to assure Hamish was able to assure them that if I had called, it would be serious, that it wouldn't be trivial. We weren't looking for help to get over a hill. And that made a big difference. They were going to pick us up anyway, but that made a big difference to the way we were received, I would argue. Um, yeah, actually, just maybe can I go back here? One of the interesting things for Taspol was that they were very quick when they understood the situation. They validated the decision anyway. They made the point, we'd rather pick you up um, when you're in one piece than pick up pieces. Um, and so I think on the basis of that, you would not hesitate to call. Um, but it was also very useful to have them validate um, the decision making. They also were very, when we got back to Hobart and they saw the gear that we had, um, a couple of them quipped, we don't usually see this level of preparedness. You got quality gear. We pull people out of the bush that shouldn't be in the bush because they've just got rubbish equipment. So we weren't asking for that validation around the equipment, but it was nice to have it. I think given all the kind of pointless torment I put myself through about calling them, it was very useful to have the decision validated, though. And they made the point um, quite clearly that trying to cross water like they were seeing would have been foolish. Now, yeah, I think there were a number of things, I guess, lessons wise. This is at the refueling point, by the way, where the medic the medic jumped out of the chopper and he was very disappointed that we didn't have something seriously wrong with us. He had all his gear with him and he wanted to patch someone up, but that was not to be. But we were looking back over the route that we'd just flown in on, and while two of them were refueling, the medic was chatting to us. Um, One of the things that they did, and I guess it goes back to my time with the Air Force, is that I knew that the last thing a chopper needs, especially if it's windy, is to be hanging around trying to sort you out. In fact, what they did was they dropped the medic off and flew off. Um, and the expectation was, and I should have had this in my first or second slide when we're talking about representing grumps by the rescue services. Often the rescue services find themselves taking down tents and packing up sleeping bags and all that sort of nonsense. If you've had a major injury, that's fair enough. But they made the point that most often they're helping people clean up their own mess. So if you call them, I would argue you call them after you've packed yourself up and you're ready to go. Your tent's down. You might have your tarp up. The minute you hear the chopper, bring your tarp down, pack your gear up. We'd actually packed up camp completely. We were sheltering behind a sand dune. We were there for about 3 hours. waiting for the chopper after we've been told by the SMS service that they were on their way. Turns out they're flying down from Launceston from doing something else. I had actually just got out from behind the sand dune and was walking back to reset the camp, thinking we might have been there for another night when the chopper turned up. Um, Obviously, being out on a beach was useful. You can get pulled out of tall timber. It's a long haul, but it just takes a little bit longer and it's a little more dangerous. Um, if in doubt, call. I did not want to call. It's the bottom line, but in the end, we did, and we should have perhaps done it earlier. Don't sweat what they'll think. Your rescue services are not there to make any judgment. They're there to make sure, as they said, that we're picking up you in one piece, not picking up pieces. And I underestimated the importance of Hamish's message. I didn't appreciate that they were very much more dependent on um, the assurance that Hamish was able to give, that, that your human backup is able to give. Then yeah, they took a lot of assurance from that in a way that I didn't really appreciate. Yeah, you can't plan for everything. Um, uh, we all know that. I think here though, a track like this, and I perhaps should have known, given my childhood experiences in the Catlins, that I probably should have been doing a bit more homework around um, the marine element. But look, even if we'd planned the heck out of it and low tide was actually at midday, not knowing that the tide difference was so small, and of course not being able to predict a storm coming in, we should have anticipated that, but um, we were down there for the storms after all. Yeah, the planning perhaps should have included a bit more of that marine. Um, the opportunity to camp and weigh up all the elements was really important. Don't rush to get out. Don't rush to extract yourself. Clearly, it's different if you've got a broken leg or broken neck or something. That's different. If you're in good health and you've got good supplies and you've got good gear and you're dry, even if it's howling sideways, take your time to make your decisions. And I think that was really important. We had all those elements squared away. We had good gear. We were dry. We were warm. We spent time playing cards, talking about things that you don't always get to talk about when you're rushing around in your day-to-day life. Yeah, take your time. I think a lesson for me, of course, is PLB. Have a backup to the PLB, and I'm wondering now if actually the PLB is your backup to your phone. Um, you have to be careful about that though, because that Apple service only works in a limited number of countries at this point. And of course, if any of you have used your GPS on full blast, you'll know how quickly it sucks your battery. Um, I'm in the habit of role-playing scenarios. I do it when I'm walking. I'm doing it when I'm planning. I'm doing it when you're just doing it all the time. I think there were scenarios though that I could have and should have. A lot of could have, should have. There's some role playing that I probably should have done around the PLB, which I didn't. Certainly some role playing around creek crossings, which I hadn't done. I mean, some creek crossings are quite benign, like this one. You don't need to do too much planning for that. And then, of course, just personally, I'd be saying to people now, just be prepared for the emotional quotient in your decision making. It can skew and make your decision making look stupid in hindsight. I don't think it's any of the decision making was necessarily stupid in the end, but having a pen and paper and just writing out and being a bit logical about what your options are certainly helps. Yeah. if you've got the opportunity to do the Southwest Track, mind the creeks, but have a go at it. It's I've got some unfinished business down there. I've got a creek to cross. I've got three of them. Um, when there isn't a southerly swell getting in the way. Any
Um,
any
yeah,
question?
thank you, Bruce. That was even better than the coming around the second time, actually.
Oh,
I'm going to
that's
take,
good.
yeah, we've got some time for some questions
Hmm.
and so forth. But I just want to ask, maybe I asked this the first time. The fact the PLB didn't work, um, why was that?
Yeah, good question. It looked like it was working. To jump straight to the end, I've got a manufacturer that refuses to answer that question. They won't answer any questions. In fact, I've had a complete blank with them. Um, and you're going to ask me which brand it was, and at the moment, I'm very happy to tell you what brand it was. C-Link by Kennard.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, look at it. Uh, it it was an older PLB, but it was in battery. It was in service. In fact, I'd only had it serviced about 6 months earlier. And it's not a duplex PLB, so it's not giving me any messaging back. It was just firing off the signal, and it does that with a code. The light coding was telling me that the GPS satellite was engaged. Um, but and it indicated that messages were going off,
Mm.
but Canberra had received nothing. And after 3 or 4 hours, I was suspicious that it was not working because
And
I know there's a response quite quickly to them.
yeah, did the people at Taspol offer any clues?
They were absolutely fascinated. They were fascinated on two counts. We were the first Apple rescue in Tasmania and the third in Australia. So they wanted to know they spent more time wanting to understand how the Apple app worked. So we spent half an hour. I ended up building a brief for them because I was screenshotting it all. I was quite intrigued as well. So yeah, we produced a sort of training package for them, which we sent down a couple of weeks after we got home. But we spent a lot of time exploring the Apple app. They looked at the PLB, of course, and they did want to know why it hadn't been functioning, but they couldn't work it out. Their tech guy at their headquarters was scratching his head as just as much as we were.
Mm. Mm. Um, Anyone else got any questions? You can either put it into the chat function or just unmute yourself and speak.
Sorry, Scott, that hasn't worked. I'll ask you again to unmute. Yep, that's
There we
Right,
are.
can you hear me now?
it.
Yeah,
Yep.
so I've been walking with a device called a Zoleo, which is a satellite communication device. So it's got the SOS button on it, and it goes through American service, the same as the Garmin InReach. Given your experience, one of the questions I've had for a while is because also got a PLP, and I've always had this question: should I carry? If I'm going to carry one, which one should I carry? And I did encounter a park ranger in Wells of Jerusalem, and he said they carry a Garmin InReach, a PLB, and a sat phone. And I asked him, I said, if you're carrying one, what would you carry? And he said the Garmin InReach. And so my question is, would you carry that in future? You do have to pay a subscription cost for it, but at least you're getting a response back after you fire the SOS button. So I've never used the SOS button, but they tell me that when you fire it off, you get a message straight back to say that the message been received. And then you get messages and updates as you go through the process of the emergency service being contacted and initiating the rescue.
Yeah. That's a great question. And in fact, spoken to the head of um, Arid Country National Parks in South Australia and pretty much got the same answer. They're out, they're doing animal culling, for example. They're out by themselves. It's quite exposed. So they carry sat phones inReaches and a PLB. And generally, the feedback at the moment is exactly as you have suggested. We've got a duplex system. By that I mean you're not just sending a message out and waiting. You're getting feedback. That was certainly beneficial in our case, and I think that's what I'd err on the side of something that gives you an assurance that your message has been heard, and that a response is on its way. I think that was the real challenge with firing a simplex um, PLB and wondering why no one had turned up by dark. And was that because lots of other people were being calling for services across Tasmania at that time of the year, or was it because this thing no longer worked? Pretty much by dinner time, I decided it had not worked. But we were warm and dry, and we just played cards, slept through the night, and we're looking at other options the next day. Yeah. I should add, it's not apropos your question, but I should add that we had decided that if the PLB was not working, we would just stay there on the beach because by then we were out of days. And within 2 days, we would have been a search party case. So it made sense to stay on the beach.
Just to show there's the other side of the coin. There's a comment here from Amanda Warriner who said that they had an emergency situation last week. The Garmin InReach didn't work, and they ended up using the PLB, and they were carrying both items of equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Wow. How cool's that? Yeah, it's hard to know. Carry both. Yeah, it's not like
Yes.
you're look, I know when you're doing a 3 week trek in or if you're doing the 10-day Kokoda, you're down to grams. And you might be doing a 3 week trek somewhere without a food resupply, you're down to grams. I still think if you've got two devices, I wouldn't worry about the weight. I'd be taking both. Your big issue, of course, is always going to be the battery. Can you keep these things going?
Stephen Millard's often comment too. InReach struggles to connect in a forest compared to a PLB, so you may not be able to get out of a rainforest.
Yeah, that's a really interesting observation. My background is aviation, amongst other things, aerials. And I was very surprised that the PLB actually was. In fact, I made a comment to Kavitha, my wife here, that where I set the PLB up initially, the vegetation, given the frequency this thing was operating on, shouldn't be affected by a bit of tea tree. Turns out, actually, it is. And I kind of double thought myself a couple of hours in. I did move it out onto the beach where there was no vegetation, but you're absolutely right. Vegetation can be a problem for these things.
Yeah. Amanda adds to her example. They were in Wallamina Creek Gorge. It was open enough for a helicopter rescue, but the cliffs blocked InReach.
Yeah, yeah. If that's Blue Mountains, one of the interesting things about ironstone is that becomes a problem for some of these devices. Yeah, you wouldn't think that it would, but you're talking frequencies that are bounced around. The lower the frequency, the more it's going to transit through vegetation. We're talking and rocks even, uh, water, but these very, very high frequencies that we're talking about with these devices, yeah, they're easily knocked around by geography and vegetation.
Mm. And coming back to the PLB, your PLB, Mike McLeod asks, have you tried the test button on the PLB?
Have we tried the test button? I've, our PLB's in disgrace in a box somewhere. I've I've not actually tried the test button. Um, we, when I, having said that, when we had it serviced, the we were told that it had been tested and it was okay. I would have thought that's a good question actually, but I would have thought firing it for real, that's kind of the ultimate test. Yeah.
Mm. All right.
I've
Oh,
got a
here we go.
question.
Mike's added, with my PLB, it provides a guarantee that the company will replace the device free of charge if it's used for a genuine purpose. So Bruce, maybe you can put that one onto your supplier to see if they'll do that.
Yeah, I think I'm not too concerned. Oh, yeah, I don't need it. Well, I do need it replaced actually. We've been tracking without one ever since.
Yeah.
But I think the issue for me was there were two issues. One was it didn't work. That was painful. Um, Ultimately, if we were there with a broken leg or a snake bite, that would have been a disastrous situation.
Mm.
But we were in good health. So I think the second issue, though, that kind of got under my bonnet a bit more than the first was the fact that the company didn't want to know about it.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
Completely unresponsive. Yeah.
Mm. That's not a good recommendation.
No, no,
Get one
no.
of their devices. And Amanda adds, she has her PLB. It's an ocean signal rescue me, and the helicopter was with them in 3 hours.
Yeah. Yeah. I was kind of expecting the same. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah.
All right.
I've got a
Lucy,
question.
sorry,
Oh,
I do as well. Sorry.
Good. You go
no, go
first,
for it.
Carly. You go.
Yeah, okay. Well, first of all, Bruce, very insightful and really honest account of your experience. I thought that was fabulous. So I'm with Sydney Bushwalkers, but also Bush Search and Rescue. So that was really interesting to know your experience. Just a question, really, on your paper that you wrote for TASPOL or whatever they're called
Mm.
down
Yep.
there.
Yep.
Have you thought of sharing that with the Blue Mountains Search and Rescue? Because that may have actually be of use to them as well.
A good
Um,
idea. No, it's not copyrighted or secret or anything. I'm certainly happy to share that around. Yeah.
yeah, especially as you mentioned that you were one of the first, if not the first, of that Apple SOS function. And I'm sure Dale Atkinson, who runs the police rescue up there, would be quite interested in your experience. I'm not sure where you're based, but I'm sure he'd be more than happy to have a wee chat with you if you wanted to.
Absolutely. I'm in Wentworth Falls actually. So
Oh,
yeah.
perfect. Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that your experience would be very useful, and that little paper that you've written with all this, whatever you said, you had screenshots, etc. So, if you wish, I can put you in contact with him.
Yeah, very happy. Very happy. No, I'd be delighted. Yeah,
Mm,
absolutely.
mm.
Yep.
Okay, thank
Thanks.
you. I'll put my details in the chat then, just in case you would like to link up there somehow.
Yeah, yeah, please do. Please do.
Mhm.
Um, was there one more question? There was another voice I could hear in the background. Or were you
I have a
just
question. Is there somebody else
okay,
who has
Kirsten?
one?
No, that was you then, Kirsten.
Okay, I actually there's quite a storm happening here. I hope you can hear me okay. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, cool. So my question is, how do you? Well, first of all, thank you, Bruce, for so candidly, as Carly said. I totally agree. Thank you so much for sharing your story, your thinking process, and all the tips and tricks that you've shared. I would invite others to do that also. So if you're interested, please do contact Bushwalking New South Wales. So you can reach us on the contact page in Bushwalking New South Wales. But the other question I'd like to ask you, Bruce, is how you and Kavitha managed to carry, is it 2 weeks worth of food and 2 PLBs and all the other lovely gear that you have? Is it, what magic trick do you have to share with us there?
I don't know if there's a magic trick. I do try and limit myself to 20 kilos. Kavitha's carrying between 12 and 15. I think in the end, or I know in the end, I was carrying 25. That's kind of okay. But Yeah, the food planning is actually, we spend a lot of time doing food planning. I think most people do when they're out for more than 3 or 4 days. The big challenge normally is water, but it's not a challenge in Tasmania, of course. So um, yeah, what we did was sit down and we said, okay, we've got 3 meals a day planned out. I tend to snack through the course of the day. I'm a big Scroggin fan, and I tend to stay fueled up by picking at stuff all day rather than relying on the 3 meals. So when we got to Grotto Creek and we said, okay, we could be here for another week if the storm persists this way, um, we just, you got a notepad there, you just sketch out, we tipped everything out in the tent. This is what we got. Let's redesign our menus for a week. And it did mean, lunch might be a soup sachet, not a full-blown meal, but you can certainly make it work. Yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Here's another message from Carly. Did you see that, David?
Yes, that's
Okay, right.
that's just in writing what Carly said verbally
Okay, cool.
about
Yeah.
getting in touch with Blue Mountain Search and Rescue. So that's she's just adding some detail there.
Yeah.
I think we've probably exhausted the questions part, so we'll wrap it up now. But I'd like to, as Kirsten said, thank you very much, Bruce, for that insights on that. It's a sort of talk, something we haven't really had before, or at least in recent memory. And I think, as Kirsten suggested, it'd be something if we could get people to all come back and do some presentations on similar types of situations.
Yeah, I think, as I said, if I was 18, I wouldn't talk to you about it like this.
No,
Talk to you about it at all, because no one wants to admit that things didn't work. But it's only when things go sideways that you actually learn the best lessons. And we were very
and
lucky
yes,
to be, like I say, we're in good health. We didn't break anything, um, and we had a great rescue service. We had some reasonable planning in the end, and if any of that's a lesson for anyone, then we should be passing it on. Yeah.
yes. We're all amongst friends here, so people can sort of divulge all sorts of
Exactly.
their failures and what have you, and we won't tell anyone.
Not until it goes on social media. Yeah.
That's right. Okay. Well, look, thanks everyone for tonight for coming along, and once again, thank you, Bruce. And
No,
we'll
thank
probably
you.
hope to
Thank you.
catch up with you in the not too distant future.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay. Bye, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much, Bruce.